Welcome back to Decouple. Today I'm joined by returning guest Noah Rettberg. Noah is a physics laboratory technician in training and a member of the German pro-nuclear movement called Nuclearia. Noah is also, as I said before, a veteran of the Decouple podcast. Go check out our episode from, I guess, slightly better times, but I think a good premonition of what's happening now. It was called the Grim Fairy Tale of German Electricity. But also Noah's recently been on the Nuclear Barbarians podcast in a two-part series. The second part's coming soon on synthetic fuels, which I highly recommend listening to. Noah has a very deep understanding of a lot of the basic chemistry and processes involved. And I think I really enjoyed that episode, and I'm looking very much forward to following up on that. So do head over to Nuclear Barbarians as well. If you're not already a listener, subscribe and check out that episode. Noah, welcome back to Decouple. It's been a little while. Your first episode was a top 5 in the charts.
Really?
It really was. Yeah, no, it was. I think people had a lot of interest. We were talking just before the closure of Grande, as well as the other two plants whose names I've forgotten in the moment.
Brockdorf und Gundereminen.
I know that you will never forget those names.
No, I won't.
Yeah. It's as a content creator, I've been told it's always good to sort of come up with the title of the content before actually making it. And I think I came up with a good title for this episode. You can tell me what you think, but Germany, Canary in the coal mine for Western energy. We might change that a little bit, but just wanted to have you on for a casual conversation about how things are feeling in Germany right now. What's going on?
I feel it very much not casual.
Right. So wanted to talk about gas, coal, and nuclear in short. But first off, tell me about I guess the overall sort of gestalt or zeitgeist of as a German of this present moment of this energy crisis. Take it away, my friend.
Is it the overall zeitgeist? I mean, everybody is now feeling an energy crisis that at this point is essentially a year old. I remember summer last year when we had, it was a time when we had our Safe Trades demonstrations, and also the time I think that you had Mark Nelson on, essentially warning of the coming energy crisis. I think you call it Winter is Coming, with Mark Nelson as Ned Stark. So this energy crisis is essentially now a year old. It has existed before the war in Ukraine. And I think that was what I told you last time, that I think when I was last time here, I thought that Putin would use this energy crisis because it would give him a good hand invading Ukraine, and he actually did. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, has worsened the energy crisis. In two ways. One way is that now we try to actively use as little Russian energy as possible. Very much immediately after the Ukrainian invasion, Germany tried getting rid of Russian oil and coal, which actually we could do quite rapidly. Gas is a different story because it's hard to transport, hard to store, but oil and coal is very much easy to transport. I mean, coal you can just dump onto a field and move in trucks and ships and trails and on rail. Oil is a little bit more complicated, but it's a liquid. It's a very much storable liquid. So oil wasn't also the issue. I think before the war we were getting, I think, around 40% of our oil from Russia, and now it's down to like 10%. Which actually the down to 10% went down really fast. The reason for the remaining 10% is basically because the one refinery that still uses Russian oil is owned by the Russians.
Oh wow!
That's it. It hasn't really something to do with that. We physically couldn't. With coal,
is that translating into really high prices at the pump? I'm not sure what gas goes for in Germany.
Not higher than in the rest of Europe, and the German government has reduced fuel taxes.
Got you.
So essentially we went from the highest fuel taxes in Europe to the lowest. Essentially as low as the EU would allow us to get, but only for 3 months. And so currently they are, I think, a little bit lower than they are in other European countries. But if you would look at the net price, then you would get very much roughly the same. They are also the other countries also did a similar thing, trying to get as little Russian pipeline oil as possible, or Russian oil tankers in their ports, and get as much oil tankers from other nations in their ports. And since coal is essentially just arriving via ship from Russia, and not, I mean, you could do by a train, but this long distances over train is just not economical. So since the coal was anyway arriving over ship, it was just a matter of getting other ships. So basically, coal we are now complete free of Russian energy. And with oil, it's a little bit remaining, but it's not really a physical issue, it's more a legal issue. And with gas, that has not been the case. We have no infrastructure of getting LNG gas in Germany right now. And we have essentially no domestic production of gas. So what we are left with is, if we want to reduce Russian gas, we need to reduce gas consumption. We partially did that. We partially tried to import gas from other European countries around us over the interconnected pipeline network that Europe has, because those other countries have LNG terminals or domestic gas production. So that is what we did. I think gas dependency on Russia was also reduced from, I think, almost 45 to now 35%. Where of our gas, I mean, now it's essentially nothing, because the Nord Stream 1 pipeline is down to maintenance. The other pipelines, I think, what is it? The Ukrainian and the Yamal pipelines are also close to delivery in zilch, because right now we're draining gas storage. We're actually not really getting a lot of gas from Russia right now. But over the last months, it was getting down from 45 at the point where the Russians invaded, and now they were at 35 a few weeks ago.
This is the gas storage, and you're aiming, I think the EU is aiming for 90% or something by winters.
Yes, that would be normal, that you, because those gas pipelines have a limited capacity of gas that you can push through them. And actually, they can't push enough gas through them. If you look at what we would need on a daily basis in the winter, those pipelines can't deliver that. So you would have gas storage that fill up in the summer and empty a little bit in the winter. And even when they are at their most empty in the winter, you would have a little bit reserve to give you security. This was normal for the last decades. And last winter it wasn't. They were extremely empty. And right now, I think a few weeks ago, they were at 60%. And now we're going down again, since consumption now is larger than what the Russians, the Norwegians, the Dutch people can deliver. So we are going down with our gas storage.
So a couple questions for you that arise out of this. I mean, in terms of the pain that everyday Germans are feeling and are likely to feel in the near future.
There's a lot already.
And it sounds like there's a lot coming, but I mean, at this point in time, Germany is a very rich and wealthy country. They can afford to, compete globally for new supplies of energy, be that LNG or other sources. But that's very much comes out of the reality that there's thriving vertically integrated industries in Germany that capture a lot of the value. You have a huge chemicals sector, a huge metal sector, manufacturing sector. Those are all, of course, dependent on plentiful Russian gas. I remember hearing about glass furnaces that have been on for the last 20 years and are at risk of shutting down. And if they close, then everything.
I know people working in such glass factories that are very much at risk of the whole company going belly up if those furnaces have to be shut down because of the gas shortage.
So, I guess for a while, Germany can coast on being a wealthy country and compete at these high energy prices. But at what point does this start to make, the underbelly of German wealth less viable? How long can, BASF go on in terms of the chemical industry in Germany? I've heard is kind of, at threat and worried about needing to close plants. In terms of this cascading effect throughout the German economy, how far away does that feel?
Months.
Wow.
I can't give you concrete numbers on that because I don't have the insider knowledge in that industry. But I can give you, but I know how extremely stressed our supplier is right now, and we are currently using not that much. I mean, it's summer, and we're draining the gas storage again. And we shouldn't be absolutely doing that. If we can't keep the level steady in the summer when you don't have that much need for heating, how could we even do it in the winter? I mean, maybe until then there isn't really a lot of left, and it's I don't know. There isn't really a way how these companies could really stay afloat. We have seen problems, companies that reduced production, that were under threat from going bankrupt basically immediately after the invasion. I mean, it's not, and it's really causal to the invasion that Putin invades immediately after German bank companies are in trouble. Those are as a result of the energy crisis, which started before the war and is now worsened by it. But we saw early effects already in the spring, and we are seeing them right now. And you're seeing them at the. I mean, there's also a large aluminium industry in Germany, which has now extreme troubles producing. The same goes for glass and the chemical industry. We see steel plants shutting down. I think it was Bavaria a month ago that I read this steel plant in Bavaria that went belly up. So we are seeing this happening already. And it's summer, so we don't have that much consumption, and not every company has already run out of money. And they can't really afford those gas prices, and they can't even afford. So what just happened? Well, it's not really what just happened. It's what happened over the last months. Year ahead baseload electricity prices. So if you would buy baseload for a constant year, which is how a lot of thermal plants sell their electricity, in which large industrial sites need. They can't afford to buy volatile, unreliable energy, so they go to electricity providers and buy most of their electricity they will buy year ahead, and they are now buying it at I think 300 euros per megawatt hour, and that's ridiculously high. That's I think 3 times of what like Hinkley Point C would sell its electricity at its strike price, and that was it's a famously expensive power plant. And if you look at what electricity usually costs over the last years, we were at year ahead by baseload prices of between 30 and 70 euros per megawatt hour. And at those prices, no industry can compete. No energy intensive industry, of which we in Germany still have a lot, because we haven't seen this degree of deindustrialization that the UK, the US, France, or Canada has seen. We have actually seen very little deindustrialization. What happened in deindustrialization mostly happened in East Germany, because East German industry was just bad. Could only exist in this context of the Eastern Bloc. There we have seen the industrialization, but not in West Germany, not really. So there is, for example, there's a German aluminium company, Trimet. They make aluminium. I think in 2019 they had a revenue of 1.2 billion euros and electricity consumption of 7 terawatt hours. That's a lot, right? We are talking about over 1% of German electricity, but it's also an extremely large company. It's not that surprising that such a large company producing so much aluminium would need so much energy. But it's a huge portion of our electricity consumption, and a large company. So, as I said, 1.2 billion euros. If they would buy the 7 terawatt hours of electricity at the year ahead baseload prices we now have, they would pay 2.4 billion euros. So they would pay twice the revenue they had in 2019 for the electricity they had in 2019. So can German industry survive at those prices? No, it absolutely can't. It can only survive if the government can subsidize this. And it probably won't be able to do that in adequate numbers.
over on a long-term basis like this. Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering in Germany if there's a tendency to just blame this purely on the Russian invasion. I mean, we talk a lot on the podcast. I think Meredith Angwin coined this term, at just the right time, and it's certainly worked its way into our community's vocabulary and rubric, and that is the fatal trifecta: over-reliance on weather-dependent renewables, just-in-time natural gas, and imports. And interestingly, in this case of Germany, that reliance on just-in-time natural gas and imports are both contingent on Russia. The only way it could be worse was if Russia was also the source of, the renewables, the solar panels and wind turbines. If Russia was China, essentially, in that regard. And so certainly it looks as if Germany had set itself up for a real disaster once this reliance on Russia came into question. In terms of the national discourse, are people starting to question the energy policy, the Energiewende of the last 10 or 15 years, or is there an attempt to sort of brush that under the carpet and blame this entirely on the Russian invasion?
So people have different ideas from why we have problems now in our gas from Russia. One idea would be, that we don't want to buy their gas anymore, and that is the reason why we don't have enough. That kinda was the case the last months, but isn't now. Now it's the case that they don't deliver enough. And so also another idea is that then why don't they deliver enough? Then essentially to blackmail us, to have our storage low, to make us vulnerable, to pressure us into lifting the sanctions. And that is very likely that this is the case, but I wouldn't discount the very real possibility that the Russians also can't really deliver what we need.
Tell me more about that.
The Russian industry mostly just makes resources. It doesn't really make machines anymore like it did back in the Soviet times. And even in the Soviet times, there were the Soviet Union was never autarkic. It imported technology from the US and from Germany in the 20s and 30s, pretty much until the war began, actually. And even after that, it imported technology, especially in the end when a lot of Soviet industries were collapsing or couldn't just keep up with what the West was doing. I mean, the Soviets in the 80s, when computer technology was really prominent in almost every sector, the Soviet Union had nothing that would really compete with what the Western world had at the time. So that was a sector where they bought a lot of technology. They bought, I think it was German technology, in automation and in computer technology, which they used to build their, at the time, largest truck plant they had. So the Soviet Union was not autarkic, but it was certainly more autarkic than Russia is. Russia is completely dependent upon technology imports from the West, but especially Germany. And this is the relationship we had with Russia, in a sense, was really symbiotic. They gave us energy, and we gave them the technology they needed to keep being a modern civilization. From machine tool to cutting fluid to chemicals to automation technology to even the stuff handling the gas in their natural gas and oil facilities. The German company Linde, which builds a lot of technology for gas handling and gas infrastructure, was largely involved in Russian in the Russian gas infrastructure. Also, I think Russia's infrastructure is extremely dependent on its railway networks, and that railway network, I think, is also extremely dependent on imports of technology from Europe, especially I think it was Swedish-made bearings. So if you have Russia doesn't have, like in the US, where you have a lot of transport. Cargo in the US is often transported either by truck or rail, but also a lot of by truck. So you have a redundancy there. In Germany, you have a lot of cargo and also humans moved over the autobahn. Russia doesn't have a comparable highway network, especially because it's so large, but also because it couldn't afford one. A lot of its harbors in the north are have problems freezing over. So if rail isn't functioning in Russia, that's a huge problem. I mean, rail is great, but if only you have rail, you run into issues, and Russia is doing that right now. Those components aren't lasting forever. They will break, especially in this situation where the whole country has a lot of stress from the war, and they can't get enough replacement from the West. And it's very questionable if they have any trust in that replacements from China would actually make this would deliver the components that they need, or if China can deliver those components. So it's a lot of talk about that China would be stepping into the huge hole that the sanctions from the West left. But it's very questionable whether the Chinese can do that, whether they have the right gear, whether their gear has the right quality, and it's also questionable whether the Russians actually trust the Chinese to deliver the right gear and deliver enough. The Russian-Chinese friendship is not as warm as many people in the West think it is.
Right. This is absolutely fascinating because I guess China is a potential winner here, but Europe's losing massively in terms of the price of energy and the threats of deindustrialization. Where would that industry go or be replaced? Likely in East Asia. Likely China would be a beneficiary. Russia is, I think there's been a lot of talk with the ruble rebounding that, hey, I mean, maybe things aren't so bad for the Russians. Certainly the sanctions aren't biting in some metrics, but I think you're illustrating ways in which they really are biting from the perspective of maintaining their vital infrastructure.
I would say the ruble course is very much decoupled from the state of the actual Russian economy, especially since the Russians have limited the ability of their citizens to buy foreign goods, to transfer their money into foreign currency, and to leave the country. And in this context, I wouldn't take the strength of the on paper strength of the Russian currency as a valid proxy for the state of the Russian economy.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Germany's plans to try and substitute for Russian gas, some of the alternative strategies. I've got a story here from Euractiv. Germany secures 4 floating LNG terminals in mad rush to replace Kremlin gas. It's interesting that all stops will be pulled to build substitute LNG technology, but of course, the path dependency of the closure of German nuclear plants seems to be pretty locked in. We're gonna talk about the nuclear side a little bit more, but for now, let's talk about some of the German plans to try and maintain the status quo to some degree in terms of an approach that is very dependent on natural gas. It's interesting again to reference Meredith Angwin. One of the things she talks about is, when your electricity system becomes so dependent on just-in-time natural gas delivery, there's a conflict, obviously, between your electricity grid and heating priorities. Obviously, that's complicated because Germany is so industrialized still. There's the competition with industry as well. In any case, a big reliance on natural gas. What are some of the potential substitute countries and particularly infrastructure that Germany requires in order to get its natural gas from other sources?
So the countries that could sell us natural gas are mostly in the Middle Eastern countries like Qatar, the US, and Australia. So the US and Australia I would consider very friendly to us, so this wouldn't put us in a lot of hot water. There are issues with the US because the Americans, especially the current government, wasn't pleased of the idea of exporting a lot of natural gas. They saw this as going against their climate pledges, and they have a large environmentally minded base in their party. So the US the US has a lot of gas infrastructure and export a lot of gas. but certainly it probably didn't build out enough gas infrastructure in order to adequately supply what we need. It also has tightened pollution restrictions on those infrastructure, which took a lot of those plants that liquefy the natural gas in order to export it. They have been taken offline or will be taken offline for those upgrades that they are getting. A large plant in Texas has burned down, so that is offline. And we saw the immediate effects of that with LNG prices in the globe shooting up and LNG prices and gas, not LNG, gas prices in the US going down because this is also an effect. The more we buy American gas, the higher the price for gas will be in the US because for the companies that will for the gas extracted, the more they can export it, the more money they can make. So if the US exports more gas, gas prices will rise in the US. So the American populace and by extension the president and his party, because they want to win the midterms. I question. Probably they won't, but they have a incentive not to export as much gas as we need. I actually don't know how it is in Australia. I couldn't tell you that. In Qatar is a completely different story. They would like to export the gas to us, especially on long-term contracts. That's what they are really eyeing for, is because yes, they can make a lot of money now, but especially in a situation where inflation is high, it's questionable if a lot of money now is Trump's having a steady stream of money for the next 20 years. So what they really want us to commit to is a long-term supply contract over 20 years, and the ruling coalition, which is largely comprised of the Green Party, doesn't want to do that. It wants gas from Qatar. It even sends its it's even sends our Green Vice Chancellor to Qatar to bow down in front of the Emir, but it doesn't want to commit to a 20-year gas contract. So that's a touchy subject there.
In terms of the domestic capacity to receive that gas, do you have any idea about the viability of these floating LNG platforms that are being constructed apparently in record times to hopefully be online, I think by February?
I know of one which it's 75 terawatt hours regasification facility they are currently building, and they are hoping to getting online by the end of this year. Whether they can do that is questionable, but it's safe to say that they will probably get maybe they will get some, but they definitely won't get enough regasification plants built and operational before the end of the winter. That I can tell you for sure. Those regasification plants don't have the capacity that those large pipelines have.
Right. I
They
mean,
just don't.
obviously, there's implications as well with, I guess, the spot LNG price and just the overall price of gas rising worldwide, with Germany competing with much poorer countries for supply, with the rolling impacts on industries that rely on natural gas as a feedstock. I mean, it almost feels like this is an ethical component here where, yes, Germany will be able to avoid some pain, but it's going to come at the expense of poorer countries who just won't be able to afford the available gas.
Pretty much. It's not just whether the gas is available, it's also a question, can the gas be shipped? And so this is a huge concern. It's also a concern that we now have with coal, because now the government is trying to get as much coal back, not just German, also the Austrian government is reactivating the Mellach coal power station. So they want to get a lot of coal, and it's also the question: do we even have the shipping capacity to handle all that coal? Because for the last decade, essentially, we tried to have less coal. So it's the same with oil. We were always saying, okay, we want to reduce oil, we want to reduce coal. So essentially, people didn't really invest in new distillation for refineries for oil or coal handling infrastructure. So what we had deteriorated. Not new ones didn't really came along. So it's also there are infrastructural concerns regarding will there be enough ships to carry all that coal and gas.
Well, I mean, you've described this very symbiotic relationship between Germany and Russia in terms of
Yeah,
getting
if
raw
Russia was a
materials.
friendly state, it would have been beautiful.
Right.
But
I
it
mean,
isn't. We
I think
deluded ourselves into thinking that the Russian have, or especially the Russian government has, even remotely good intentions. It never did. It was probably to anyone that that was willing to accept to see the grim reality as it is. It was obvious, essentially just 2 decades ago, that the Russian state is not heading in a well direction and won't be a friendly and reliable partner like the other Eastern Bloc
right.
countries became.
Right. I mean, I guess this raises the question about whether there's any possibility of Germany splitting from the Western alliance. I think people were impressed with, and maybe Russia didn't anticipate the degree of Western cooperation on sanctions, for instance. I know I'm asking you to predict the future, which is always a difficult thing to do. But I remember seeing German trade unions, for instance, coming together and saying, we shouldn't be boycotting Russian fossil fuels. It's going to impact a lot of workers, a lot of jobs. I mean, is there an element within Germany that is going to look for an easy way out here and attempt
definitely. They are probably for 2 months already. There's a lot of Leidensdruck, suffering pressure right now in Germany. I mean, not just in Germany, everywhere else also. But
will Germany bend the knee in this kind of battle of wills between Putin and freezing in the winter? Do you think there's any possibility of that? Or again, I carry on with what you're saying. Is there kind of a fifth column within Germany that's
there's definitely a fifth column. I mean, essentially, the entire German intelligentsia has large sympathies for Russia. There's a lot of Russophilia in Germany. Especially into the cultural creators, to the media creators, which is the main reason why German politics was for the last 2 decades so extremely blind towards the danger that's coming from Russia. And they since day one, you see the cultural elites in Germany trying to push the government into not supporting Ukraine, into an almost deluded sense of pacifism that they have, and an extreme degrees of whataboutism, and that the smallest defects that the Ukrainian state has is held up as almost equally to the crimes against humanity that the Russians are committing in Ukraine. So yes, there exists such a fifth column, and it did for decades. So this is completely unrelated from the energy issue. There is this fifth column in Germany, especially in the. It sounds stupid, but it pretty much is the cultural elites, the academia of journalists, of artists, of writers, poets, singers. So yes, there is such a fifth column. If you would, however, talk to the everyday German, they have been certainly influenced by this, but most can surely see what Russia is doing in Ukraine. It's just terrible. But what they are also seeing is that they are suffering from it. And if their suffering becomes enough, they will certainly have no issues buying Russian products and buying Russian gas and energy and lifting the sanctions. And this is also a thing. If we would to decide to say, okay, we quit this stuff, we don't want to boycott Russian energy in the slightest, will we buy everything that we have? If we would do that, it's still the question, first, can, and second, want the Russians, or to put it better, Putin and his cronies deliver the energy. One reason is he needs the supplies back. So until he doesn't get this, he will probably not be very kind to us. And another reason is that it could just be that until that point, Russia deteriorates so fast that they can't deliver so much energy anymore. So the Russians might end up at the point where they have to decide, okay, which country to which country will we sell energy? And they will certainly sell Germany energy if they have any. Because if they could get one country to lift the sanctions, they would choose Germany. We're probably the most important exporter of technology to Russia for the Russians. So, and also they have two direct lines to us through the Nord Stream pipelines. That even if like the Polish Navy would blockade the Baltic Sea, or the Ukrainians and Polish shut down the other pipelines, we could get energy through those gas pipelines. So this is certainly the case that if the Russians have gas, not just in Russia, but also have the capability to get the gas to the Vyborg end in Russia, where the gas enters the Nord Stream pipelines. If they can get it there and they have gas, we would be probably the first ones they would sell it to if we would lift our sanctions. And then there is the question, would Germany lift those sanctions? So looking at the current government, no, they are definitely not in the mood to lift those sanctions. But they are also definitely not in the mood to lose their careers and be hated by everyone. So if the pressure from, I don't know, the street, usually the people in Germany are not that towards applying a lot of pressure on the street. Especially violent protests in Germany only ever come from the extreme right and the extreme left, which are not that politically potent groups in Germany. So I could not envision a Sri Lanka-style scenario where starving protesters storm government buildings. So that would probably not happen. But there could very much be just very normal protests of people that can't heat their homes, can't afford gas for their cars, that can't afford the ever rising prices in the supermarket for food, that can't afford to buy new clothes, that have lost their job because the companies in which they worked collapsed or are under pressure of collapsing. So if the pressure from quotation marks the street, the people rise enough, then it could very much be that the German government would submit to the Russians or collapse on its own, be quickly replaced by anyone that would do that. But also another thing that you have to know about German politics, essentially everyone doesn't want to see the far right party gaining any power. So, and the far right party is very much pro-Russia and pro-fossil fuels. So they could gain significantly from this crisis if the crisis worsens. Germans are quite reluctant to vote for the far right party. They get their fair share of roughly 10% of the population, but the other 90% don't seem to like them very much, except in East Germany, in some regions where they are very popular. But in general, really most Germans don't like them and will be reluctant to vote for them. It's probably in other European countries we see people are more willing to vote for a far-right party in France, Netherlands, Hungary, or Austria, Poland. So that is the case. But in Germany, we see real reluctance to vote for left-wing or right-wing extremist parties. Also, you have to know the left-wing extremist party, the far-left party, Die Linke, which, by the way, is a direct. Its ancestor is the ruling party of East Germany.
Okay.
One should keep that in mind. At least the East German side of it came out of the ruling party of East Germany. The West German side of the is a splinter group from the main Sotdem party. So the far left and the far right party are pro-Russia. They were always pro-Russia, and they are for lifting sanctions. The far left party is in shambles. They will probably not be able to gain a lot of this, but the far right party might, if it comes to that. So what probably all parties in Germany will try to avoid is this party gaining any popularity. So this could end that if they feel the government is unstable, we can probably not keep it together. We would lose any election that will come up to the far left party. The industry are dying. The industry is dying. People are freezing. They will I would give it a huge likelihood they will submit to the Russians.
Wow. I'm coming to you out of Canada here, and we've shown some flexibility with our sanctions. We have I think a critical piece of infrastructure, a turbine that's required by the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which was sent to Siemens affiliate here in Canada to be maintained. You've talked a lot about Russia's dependence on Western technology to keep its infrastructure running. This is a nice example of that. And I would imagine
it's all Western technology. It's even countries like Turkey. It's not just that. It's just Germany and maybe the US. It's essentially the entirety of Europe, North America, Japan. When those countries don't export to China, to Russia, they have a problem.
Right. And so Canada, under I think a lot of diplomatic pressure from Germany, has been flexible, shall we say, to be charitable with its sanctions to release this vital piece of equipment. With the hope that this will enable Europe to secure the gas it needs not to freeze this winter. So we're already seeing perhaps some buckling of that iron will of the West to sanction Russia severely for its actions in Ukraine when it comes to these geopolitical concerns. And I think we see that quite often, that energy trumps climate. And these pragmatic decisions will get made. But that was a very interesting analysis of the German political spectrum and what's likely to occur. I've been predicting a right-wing populist backlash for some time in Europe, which would be pretty terrible for climate, obviously. But interesting to hear about how that may play out more specifically in Germany. We would be remiss to not be talking with a nuclear expert from Germany about the situation. Well, I think you've earned that title. You're certainly quite passionate about the topic. So I wanted to touch briefly on there we are on the nuclear closures, how that's proceeding. But actually, first, I just wanted to briefly talk about this coal substitution for gas that we're seeing. You've mentioned it a little bit in terms of the import capacity, but just briefly, Germany's famous for its brown coal, for its lignite coal. Are we seeing a big uptick in that regard? I'm curious. It seems like when a coal plant is brought offline in Germany, I think it's carefully mothballed. It seems like your capacity to bring old coal plants back online seems to be robust, whereas there's a real reluctance to reconsider the phase out of the remaining three or try and bring the other three plants that were closed at the end of last year back online. So maybe we can tie that question together. What's going on with lignite, and let's chat a little bit about the nuclear closures.
So lignite is 20%, or last year it depends. It fluctuated over the years. Last year it was 20%. In 2020 it was a little bit below that. 2019 it was also roughly 20% of German electricity. So lignite runs in Mittellast. I don't quite know what would be the right English term. It's still kind of baseload, but it also does, as it does. Baseload would essentially mean we all just run at a steady power. But what it essentially does, it's mostly running at high power levels, but it's also throttling a bit because it needs to make way for renewables, and it needs to come up a little bit for for when the renewables don't produce that much. So yes, lignite power plants are the German lignite power plants have good load following capabilities, but they are mostly running at high capacity factors. The bituminous coal, hard coal power plants, they all import coal from outside of Germany. They have capacity factors that are a lot lower, especially because sometimes they are in when there's really high demand and not enough wind or solar, they are brought back as in emergency situations as reserve power plants. Like also gas power plants are also done sometimes. And so that is how we use the coal power plants in Germany. Last year we had 100 out of our 490 terawatt hours of electricity was lignite, and I think 50 terawatt hours was bituminous coal. 50 terawatt hours was gas, 66 terawatt hours was nuclear, the rest was various renewables. You also have to keep in mind that there are a lot of gas power plants outside of the German grid that make electricity for various industrial sites, which, to my knowledge, amount to 40 terawatt hours. So, in addition to this 50 terawatt hours of gas on the public grid, there was also 40 terawatt hours that was privately produced and privately consumed. Keep that in mind. It's not just the 50 terawatt hours on the grid that have to be replaced when we talk about gas. So as I said, those lignite power plants, they are mostly there is not a lot of spare capacity that can come online without reactivating old plants, which have been mothballed and have been in reserve. When we talk about that, those power plants are in reserve, that doesn't mean that they come that back quite easily. Especially those which have been longer in this reserve function, they have seen not that much maintenance over the last years. So it's not that clear how well those plants can be brought back, especially since many of the people that worked there moved into other fields or into other power plants. So I'm friends with someone who works at the Austrian Mellach power station, which is a bituminous coal plant there. They have, it's a coal and gas plant. One unit coal, 2 units gas. The coal unit was closed very recently. He worked there, then he transferred to the gas units, and now the coal unit is brought back. And I've heard a lot of the issues that they have with bringing that plant back. It's very much possible, but they are looking for people to do it right now. And of course, they can find it, but it's also a question: can they find it in the right amount of time? In Austria, it's just this one coal power plant, and in Germany, we would talk about dozens of coal power plants that would need to come back. And I have doubts that we can win all of those power plants back. We could theoretically bring back up to 40 gigawatts of power plants that have been in various degrees of being mothballed and decaying. Whether we can do that, I'm highly doubtful. Historically, over the last years, we didn't really ever see going more than 26, 27 gigawatts of our 40 gigawatt coal fleet being online. Even in situations in the past where the coal was definitely very much needed on the grid, it didn't go over that. So, can they bring so that would say that probably around 13 gigawatts of those, or at least 10, can't just go online that easily. So the question is, how likely is it that we can bring those into an operational state until the winter is coming? And when we talk about Austria, a country of 8 million people that has issues recommissioning a 300 megawatt plant, then Germany, 10 times the population recommissioning 30 times the plants in capacity, would probably be a larger issue. So I don't see that. I don't see that all of those 40 gigawatts can be available in the winter. I would be expecting more like 2030, 33 in that region to be really in a good operational state, a reliable operational state by winter.
Wow. It's interesting in Ontario where we had this nuclear powered coal phase out. We actually demolished, the old coal facilities. I mean, they may have been end of life anyway.
Nanticoke.
Nanticoke.
I've been listening to that episode.
Yeah, famous pictures of the smokestacks being demolished, coming down. But I guess it's my understanding that hasn't occurred as much in Germany with these retired plants. They haven't been demolished. They've been mothballed. Is that correct?
Mostly. We haven't seen that many being really destroyed.
How does that compare with the nuclear plants that have been closed? I've seen a footage of a cooling tower coming down. I think
that was probably Philipsburg.
Right. Is there more of a rush to erase the legacy of nuclear?
Yes, they start taking the plant apart a few months after commissioning. With the 3 plants that have been closed last year, they are not that fast because for Gronde and Brockdorf, they currently don't have the license to decommission and to deconstruct the plant. In Grunde-Remmingen, they have the license and they have already started deconstructing that plant. There has been a study by the TÜV, which is how to explain TÜV to non-Germans. It's an institution that checks a lot of types of machines that you can have. It proves everything from cars to power plants. If your car isn't certified by the TÜV in Germany, you are not allowed to drive it on the road. So that's what the TÜV does. It proves the state of various kinds of machinery. So the government of Bavaria, of the Bavarian state, has been very supportive of the idea of extending the lifetime of the Isar 2 nuclear power plant, which is currently still running, and also eyeing the possibility of taking the Grunde-Remmingen C plant back online, which is the only one where they started deconstruction. And I think it was a month ago that the study that the TÜV did came out, and the TÜV was what essentially said that there are no real issues continuing the operation of Isar 2, and that Grunde-Remmingen C is still in a state where it could be brought back. But in the past, they have been really fast with decommissioning. For example, in Philipsburg, we see the flushing of the primary circuits just months after the plant has been closed. And in the summer of 2020, we saw the cooling towers of Philipsburg being detonated just 6 months after the plant was shut down.
Is this because nuclear falls under the same ministry as the Environment Ministry? It's the Ministry of Environment and Nuclear Safety. It's a very bizarre conglomeration of files in one ministry.
So the way that decommissioning is done in Germany, it's done very, very fast. For example, when you see in Great Britain, this thing where you close off the reactor for 100 years, wait until most of the activation in the building has decayed, where you can safely just decommission it normally. That isn't done in Germany. So we try to decommission the reactors as fast as possible. Honestly, try them the most expensive way possible. Because every component has to be stored in this little Conrad container. So the reactor or the steam generators can't be taken out whole and stored whole. They have to be in situ sawed into little bits and then put into those storage containers, which makes it expensive. And this is pretty much started, the process started really after. So the timetable of decommissioning we're talking about is roughly 2 decades, of which most of the work is already done in the first decade. So yes, they are. It's mandated that they move this quickly.
And is that for ideal? I mean, you said it's uneconomic. It doesn't make a ton of sense. You let the hot stuff decay quite quickly, as I guess the British are doing. This is for ideologic and political reasons, I guess, that this is sped up in this way.
Yeah, kind of. I think one could very much suspect they don't want to those plants hanging around so that anyone could get the idea of taking them back online, like you did in Canada. You took back essentially offline reactors back onto the grid, and when we had a gas crisis in Europe in 2007, 2008, Bulgaria considered taking back online nuclear power station, which had been neglected for essentially 2 decades and had been in a very bad state at that point, and that was very much worried. But the thing is that they were really secure that the Atomausstieg was a done deal. It wasn't really for the last 2 decades that this was really threatened, that someone would talk about bringing back
Right. Didn't
decommissioning
seem
plan.
possible.
So I wouldn't account this to them having fears that someone would ever bring back a closed nuclear power station. It's essentially the anti-nuclear movement that sprung up in the 70s in Germany did something which also the Green movement did. In Germany, it's called the Ritt durch die Instanzen. So the people that were part of the counterculture at some point realized that if they are always part of the counterculture, they will never really get the chance to realize their ideals. So what they did is becoming the
Mainstream.
the establishment, not just the mainstream, the establishment, becoming the establishment, getting their people into the nuclear regulators, into the environmental ministry, into the power companies, into the utilities, and thus being able to dictate which way the nuclear power sector had to operate. And it was purposefully designed to be the most detrimental to it being economical. In 1990, the then Minister President of one of the German states, Gerhard Schröder, which then had the first red-green coalition. He was essentially comparable to a governor of a state, and the coalition agreement of the Green and the Socialdemokratische Party back then purposefully said that they will oppose any ways of solving the problem of nuclear waste before there isn't a clear timetable for a nuclear exit in Germany. So this was their demand from the very first time. We will try to do our very best to prohibit any safe way of disposal of nuclear waste being done until the German government isn't really committed to ending the use of nuclear energy in Germany. And this is important because the state of Niedersachsen, Lower Saxony in Germany was the state where the DGR was supposed to be in Germany.
Right. So just briefly, I guess, in closing, what's the state of the discourse on maintaining the remaining 3 reactors? There's a tweet that's gone a little bit viral. I think it's Professor Ramsdorf stating that the last 3 reactors won't make a difference anyway, that the fuel is sourced from Russia, essentially that they won't make a difference in time. Can you talk about the discourse? Maybe let's focus on that tweet and dispel some of the inaccuracies there.
Yeah, nothing of what that dude said is right. It's simple as that. Germany, Russia has only very recently gained the capability of manufacturing the fuel elements that Western type reactors need, and they never really sold that to any client. So no, there was never any fuel built by the Russians used in a German reactor. So that's one. Then there is a question: was there ever any fuel enriched by the Russians in German reactors? And yes, that has been the case in the past, before Germany has sufficient enrichment capabilities. There is far more enrichment capabilities in Germany, and those capabilities will remain because the enrichment plant in Germany doesn't have a set closure date. So no, we can enrich our own fuel elements, and we can also build our own fuel elements. There are only ever 2 companies that build the special type of fuel elements that German reactors need. That is Westinghouse in Sweden and ANF, Advanced Nuclear Fuel, a subsidiary of Framatome, which has its factory also here in Germany. So the fuel elements that we would use in our reactors would be built either in Sweden or in Germany, and the enrichment would be very likely done in Germany. The uranium would be most likely sourced from Canada, or so possibly from Kazakhstan. I think there's some that comes from Africa. But if, for example, we could, and I think, to my knowledge, we very much can, if we would make new fuel elements, source it from Canadian uranium. So there isn't really any involvement that the Russians need to have in those fuel elements, or did in the past time. This is absolutely ridiculous. It's a lie, somewhat based in reality, in the way that the Eastern European VVER reactors, the Soviet designed reactors, use fuel elements that until recently could only ever be bought from the Russians. But even that isn't the case anymore. The Swedish, the Finnish, not Swedish, the Finnish, the Czechs, the Slovaks, and what is the Hungarians and the Ukrainians and the Bulgarians, they use those Russian fuel elements. We never did. And now they are going to Westinghouse, to Sweden, to get their fuel elements from there. There's a process that Ukraine started right after the Crimea invasion, and has now completed, and also the other Eastern European nuclear power plant owners also doing this. This is utter lie. We don't need Russia for our fuel. In Germany, we never did need Russia. And now, even in the countries that use Russian reactor technology, they will never again use Russian fuel. So this is an utter lie. Also, there is still a little bit of fuel left to make a significant impact in the winter, which is a completely different thing that we could talk here. One thing is reactivating Gronde and Brockdorf, which we can. Right now, they are in a state that probably in 2 to 3 months they can be brought back online. And continuing the operation of the 3 reactors that are currently online into the spring. So we could have 5 of those giant reactors, almost 7 gigawatts electricity production, equal in size to the country of Austria, could be online during this winter. And this will make a damn significance, because right now we probably might not even have enough assured capacity to meet our baseload demands. Not to mention even our average demand or peak demand. So those reactors, not just electricity production, but just the sheer amount of gigawatts that we can securely have on our grid, those up to 7 gigawatts would make a huge difference.
And what's the state of the politics around this? Is there any chance for the remaining 3 to run at lower power, as you're saying, until spring? What's the state of the politics? I think the Christian Democrats and the Greens recently said this is not on the table.
No, the Christian Democratic Union, which is the conservative party in Germany, they recently started a vote in the Bundestag, in which they said we want to operate those plants in the winter, and it was denied. The coalition voted against it, and it didn't get a majority. So for now, but what is now? A few weeks maybe, this is off the table again. But actually, the conservatives didn't let that sit on them. They are speeding up again. That they want to keep those plans for now. And also, the Liberal Party has been doing this for the last weeks. For some reason, probably to keep the coalition, some coalition agreement that they have with the Social Democrats and the Greens, in which they are the ruling coalition right now. All liberal members of parliament voted against this, and so that's why it didn't happen, which I think they will regret. They are kind of find reason like, no, this isn't that far enough, or something. Yes, we are for nuclear, but they find some reason, right? Despite them saying that they are for nuclear, or like not for nuclear, but for a slightly delayed Atomausstieg right now. But they are finding reasons why they say that this vote was right. But the reality is this costs time. Right now, we are at a point that if the government says now, okay, enough is enough, we will continue to operate for a short time. Grund and Brockdorf could be probably up and running in late October, early November. So right at the time when winter begins. If we want those plants online when winter begins, we need to give the order now. If we wait, they still can be brought back online in around 2 to 3 months. But if we delay the date by which we order them being back online, we also delay the date by which they can be back online into the winter when we actually need them. So damage is being done by waiting. And what the Liberal Party is now doing is dangerous because we're losing time.
I guess it's interesting. I mean, this just demonstrates such a strong anti-nuclear commitment on behalf of the establishment that even in the midst of such a dire energy crisis, even with the risk of collapse of much of the industrial sector, they're still so adamant, even just about delaying the closure by what would amount to probably 4 months, 5 months, just is extraordinary. And I think really speaks to the strength of the anti-nuclear movement. And as you're saying, that transition from counterculture to the establishment, it's extraordinary. And I guess
really ingrained establishment, but they are losing grip on the power that they have fast. They have already lost support from the people. The people, if I think Nuclearia commissioned a survey around a year ago, because back then there wasn't really a lot of reliable data how Germans thought about nuclear energy. We knew old surveys which said, oh, Germans don't support nuclear energy, and we kind of felt the tide seems to be a little bit shifting back then in 2021. So we thought, okay, we need better data, so we commissioned a study. We have been accused by the anti-nuclear people to do that, to say, oh, Germans are pro-nuclear and to cheat or something, but that was never the intent. We actually didn't know. We wanted to get a real insight into how Germans think. So we were one of the first who commissioned such a study, and we found that even in the summer of 2021, that the tides had changed a bit, that it wasn't that only 20% of Germans support nuclear energy. We were back then already at 40%. And over the last year, those 40% grew to now 60%. We've seen also interesting demographic shifts, because back then in the summer, it was mostly younger people that were for nuclear energy. Now it's more older people, which is interesting. The young people didn't change their mind that much on nuclear energy. It's mostly the older people, but not really the green people. We also saw it through parties, back when only like that now I think in every party affiliation of voters, we see that the majority is for the continued operation. Only in the Greens they are not. In the Social Democratic Party, in the far left party, the voters, there is a small majority for nuclear. In the far right, conservative and liberal party, there is a giant majority of far over 80% of their voters, which are supportive of nuclear energy in general, not just like wanted to delay some.
And obviously, public opinion is important to politicians, but I would think if the labor movement, who are I guess flirting with this idea of sort of softening sanctions against Russia, or some of the big industrialists. I remember hearing the head of Volkswagen's, advocating that we should stop the phase out or at least delay it. I mean, one would think.
Oh, he has been saying that for I think almost over a year now.
Yeah,
he's been also saying that before this energy crisis was really bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is a moving story. I'm very grateful, Noah, to have had you on. You've clarified a lot of things for me, both from a technical, cultural, and also just a on the ground feel. So I look forward to touching bases with you in several months' time, seeing how the story is developing. But thank you very much for making the time. I think you very much deserve the aforementioned title of nuclear expert, and we're very grateful to have you back on Decouple.
Thanks. Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure and it was an honor. And
Okay.
I'm extremely flattered that apparently enough people like me to make my old appearance one of your top 5 episodes.
Absolutely. Okay, Noah.
It's huge. Thank you.
Decouple celebrity. Okay, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Yes.